Okay, picture this. The smoke is literally still clearing on the jagged, rocky peak of Mount Carmel. The air is incredibly thick, the tension of the entire nation has just snapped, and a lone figure is standing there, completely victorious, after what is arguably the greatest spiritual showdown in ancient history. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating narratives in the biblical text, the story of the prophet Elijah. But listen, this explainer isn't just about a massive, triumphant victory. We're going to take a dynamic, scene-by-scene look at an unbelievable high, followed by a sudden, total collapse under a desert shrub, and the beautifully surprising way God responds to a prophet who has absolutely nothing left in the tank.
Now, to really understand the crash, we first have to see the peak. Let's set the stage. Elijah lived around 870 BC, right during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And at this point, the nation of Israel had pretty much completely abandoned the worship of Yahweh for Baal, who is a Canaanite storm god. Enter Elijah, standing practically alone against the entire culture. He actually challenges 850 prophets of Baal to a massive contest on Mount Carmel. The rules are simple. Let's see whose God answers with fire. So the prophets of Baal go first. They scream, they dance, they cut themselves all day long. And nothing. Total silence. Then Elijah steps up. He completely drenches his altar in water just to make it impossible. He prays one incredibly short, simple prayer. And then the fire of the Lord falls. And we're not talking about a little spark here. It completely consumed the sacrifice, the stones, the dust, and literally licked up the water right out of the trench.
In a single afternoon, the tide of the entire nation completely turns. Those 850 prophets of Baal, defeated. And right after this, the sky grows dark with these heavy rolling clouds, and a brutal 3.5-year drought is finally broken by torrential rain. I mean, talk about a good day at work, right? This was, without a doubt, the absolute peak of Elijah's entire ministry. It's this incredible moment of high energy, unbelievably high stakes, and total divine vindication. He has just won the most dramatic contest in the entire Old Testament.
17 miles. That's how far it was. Elijah is so energized by this rush of divine adrenaline that he practically invents extreme sports right then and there. He tucks his cloak into his belt and literally outruns King Ahab's horse-drawn chariot in the pouring rain for 17 miles, all the way to the city of Jezreel. He is untouchable, he's fearless, and he is riding the absolute highest wave of his life.
But then, the very next morning, the inciting incident happens. And I want you to notice the shocking contrast here between the victory and the threat. Queen Jezebel gets the report of what happened on the mountain. She doesn't send an army to arrest him. She just sends a courier with a single sentence. It's actually just 6 words on a page in the original Hebrew text, basically threatening to end his life within 24 hours. Now think about this. The man who had just stared down 850 false prophets without even flinching. The man who just ran a 17-mile chariot sprint. He reads a message carried by a simple messenger, and he absolutely panics. He runs for his life. It turns out, the day after a massive spiritual victory is very often the most vulnerable day in a person's life. If we track this journey, we start to see this massive geographical and emotional shift happening. Elijah goes from the fiery, triumphant heat of Mount Carmel all the way down to the dusty, dry, absolute desolation of the deep southern wilderness. Elijah runs a full day's journey beyond the very last town on the map. He is leaving the road, he's leaving his servant behind, he's leaving any place where someone could find him, comfort him, or help him. He is running headfirst into total desolation.
Deep in that desert, he finds a solitary, scrubby little broom tree. Sometimes it's called a juniper tree. It's barely taller than a man, and honestly, it offers very little real shade from the blazing sun. He just collapses and sits down beneath it, completely and utterly isolated. This tree becomes the ultimate symbol of total physical and emotional exhaustion. He has officially left all his help behind.
And right there, under that scrubby little tree, he prays what might honestly be the most raw, unfiltered prayer in the entire biblical narrative. He says, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life." This is it. This is his absolute lowest point. The adrenaline has completely crashed. The fear has totally overwhelmed him. He doesn't want to fight the culture anymore. He doesn't want to be a prophet anymore. He just wants to give up, go to sleep, and die under a shrub. And then, he actually falls asleep.
But here is where the story gets incredibly beautiful. God responds to this breakdown, but not at all in the way you might expect. There's no profound, earth-shattering prophecy. There's no harsh rebuke for his sudden lack of faith after literally calling down fire from the sky the day before. God just sends an angel to make him a hot breakfast. Just bread baked on the coals and water in a jar.
There is such a beautiful, methodical grace to this care. The angel doesn't shake him awake, he just gently touches his shoulder. He provides a hot, nourishing meal of bread baked fresh on the coals. Then, and this is absolutely crucial, he just lets the man go back to sleep. Later on, he wakes him up and feeds him a second time, simply telling him the journey ahead is going to be too great for him. Notice what's happening here. God addresses the prophet's profound bodily exhaustion before he ever attempts to address him spiritually.
And that simple provision was exactly what he needed. On the supernatural strength of that single angelic meal, Elijah gets up and walks for 40 days and 40 nights, going even deeper into the wilderness.
He walks all the way to Mount Horeb, which you might also know as Mount Sinai. The whole atmosphere of the story shifts here to this quiet, ancient, incredibly heavy place. This is the exact mountain where Moses once received the law. But Elijah doesn't march up to the summit in victory like Moses did. Instead, he finds a dark cave on the side of the mountain, crawls inside and hides himself in the pitch black. While he's hiding away in the dark, the word of the Lord finally comes to him with a piercing, deeply personal question. God asks, "What dost thou hear, Elijah?" It's not an accusation, it's an invitation. And it prompts Elijah to just open the floodgates and pour out all his pent-up pain, his deep frustration, and his profound belief that he is literally the only person left on earth who actually cares about God's covenant.
God responds by telling Elijah to step out and stand on the mountain because the Lord is about to pass by. And then the drama absolutely spikes. A massive, rock-breaking, hurricane-force wind tears at the mountain. Then, a violent earthquake shakes the very ground he's standing on. Then, a raging fire sweeps across the peak. These are terrifying, overwhelming displays of raw natural power. But the text goes out of its way to make something explicitly clear. The Lord was not in the wind, he was not in the earthquake, and he was not in the fire.
And after the fire comes this. The original Hebrew text uses this incredible phrase, kol demama dakah. It translates so beautifully to a sound of thin silence, or a whisper. I really want you to think about that. The mighty wind, the ground splitting open, the blazing fire. None of those massive, loud, cinematic things moved Elijah out of his hiding place. But this delicate, still, small voice did. When Elijah hears that thin silence, he wraps his face in his mantle and he finally steps out to the entrance of the cave. So, the absolutely crucial point is what happens next. God asks the exact same question a second time. What dost thou hear, Elijah? The dramatic repetition in the text is fascinating. You see, the question hasn't changed a single bit, but Elijah's posture has completely shifted. The first time he was hiding in the dark, defensive and broken. The second time, he is standing out in the open air, wrapped in his mantle, actively listening to the whisper.
Elijah reveals what scholars often call a lonely man theology. It's this flawed perception we all tend to fall into when we are completely burned out. He says, even I alone am left. He honestly, truly believes he is flying solo, the absolute last faithful person alive on the planet. But God counters that with a hidden reality. God says, actually, I have left me 7,000 in Israel. Elijah thought he was entirely alone. God says there's actually a massive resistance of 7,000 others who haven't bowed to Baal.
And then comes the recommissioning. Notice how incredibly practical this is. God's answer to Elijah's massive, debilitating burnout wasn't permanent retirement, it was a new assignment. He tells him to go back through the wilderness to Damascus. He gives him very specific, actionable, geopolitical tasks. Anoint a new king of Syria, anoint a new king of Israel, and finally, anoint a young man named Elisha to be your successor. God is literally pulling Elijah out of his isolation and inserting him right back into a massive, multi-generational plan.
So coming back to the image of that broom tree one final time, we can finally see the full picture. That little shrub in the desert was not the end of Elijah's story. It was simply the place his story was rewritten. The exact same prophet who crashed into the dirt and said, "It is enough, I'm done," would eventually, according to the narrative in 2 Kings, be carried up into heaven in a chariot of fire. But that incredible destiny, that famous chariot of fire, all of it began with a simple, warm meal cooked by an angel in the dirt.
And that brings us to the core takeaway from this entire incredible narrative. When we look at our own periods of deep exhaustion, that intense isolation, and that desperate need for recovery, we have to remember the true purpose of the provision. God did not feed you to put you on a shelf. He fed you to send you back out.